Let's continue to talk about the New Deal, summarize it in general, list the programs, but we want to take a balanced approach. That means we want to look at it from the modern liberal / progressive point of view. How do they feel about the New Deal? We also want to look at it from the classical liberal / libertarian point of view, and also a conservative point of view. We want to present the New Deal as it is, as it was, from both sides. We don't want a biased opinion. We're going to try to do our best to show you both sides, and then you, the viewer, can decide what you really feel about the New Deal programs. Remember, here are the 4 causes. I don't agree with these, but these are going to be the answers for the causes of the Great Depression on the AP test. Outside the AP test, your real reason is going to be the Federal Reserve. So let's go deeper into that. Remember, we have this giant decline that did not necessarily need to happen, and this will cause the Great Depression. This reduction in money, however you want to look at it, and then the subsequent 10 years have followed that were absolutely terrible for Americans. So let's go into actually the real version here. This is not the AP version. I'm not going to spend too much time because I know you just want the stuff that's going to be on the test. So the real version of why did we have the Great Depression? The Federal Reserve, the bankers' bank. This is where this is where the currency comes from. Banks borrow from them. You borrow from the bank. This is how money gets in circulation. So when the banks or the Federal Reserve has low interest rates, more money goes into the economy. This causes inflation. What is inflation? We talked about this in the video before. When we increase the supply of money without increasing the supply of goods, we then have an increase in demand. And that demand, without an increase in the supply of goods, is going to cause a general rise in prices. And you can see here, the price of the Dow Jones is going up. Why is it increasing? Does that mean that companies are getting bigger and better and they're making better and better goods and the cars are getting better and people are buying more and people are working more? Or does this really just reflect a general rise in prices because we have not really messed with the supply of goods, but we've printed too much money? And by printing too much money, that means the Federal Reserve has lowered interest rates. That's increased borrowing from banks, and that increases borrowing from people from banks. And then when people have more money, they spend more money. And that is what this has created. It's really kind of not real. It's imaginary. It's a bubble. And eventually the reality will come in and it will shrink back down. And these are completely natural. We'll talk about this in a second. You're going to have these ups and downs, but you don't need big booms and big busts like we have here. There's a big boom. That's the inflation. And then what happens during this time period, the Federal Reserve decides in the 1920s, hey, at the end of the 1920s, let's just stop printing currency. Maybe we're going in the wrong way with this. That's going to cause a giant drop. That is deflation. Inflation is the general rise in prices. Deflation is going to be the general decrease in prices because there's less money for banks to borrow from the Fed. That means less money for people to borrow from banks. That means people spend less money. That means they're buying less. And if you're buying less, all of a sudden, businesses and companies are going to have to lower their prices to sell to you. Imagine a car company has to cut their prices in half just to get you to buy a car. Well, if they're selling cars at half the price, they're more than likely going to go out of business. They go out of business. They can't pay back the loans that they borrowed, so the banks go out of business. It all crashes because of this situation where we created deflation. And you're saying, well, why would the Federal Reserve pump up the economy? And then why would they suck out the money of the economy? You got to remember, the Federal Reserve was very new at this time. It was in its nascent early stages. They did not know what they were doing. Look at all the research. Look at all the reports. The guys that were running the Federal Reserve, they really didn't know what they were doing. So it's no surprise that they inflated the currency, and then at the worst possible scenario or situation, they then deflated the currency. So they're just pretty much morons. It may not be, you can't not necessarily attribute this to malice, but you can definitely attribute these decisions to incompetence. But nonetheless, they are the villain in this story, at least from my perspective. You can go with the AP causes, but in my story, these fools made terrible decisions that made this situation much worse than it ever had to be. And then with a combination of government intervention, it got even worse. The government jumps in and says, oh, no, we're going to fix it. We're going to make a bunch of laws that get involved in the economy, and we'll send it right back up. Wrong. So the Federal Reserve, with their poor monetary practices in combination with the government that gets very involved, caused the boom, the crash, and a prolongated depression. These cycles usually last about a year. There are throughout the 17th century, 18th century, and early 19th century, and early 20th century, there were tons of panics, ups and downs, but they never lasted more than a year. This one lasts for almost 10 years because of the government's jumping into this. So let's go back to the Great Depression story. This one is kind of true. This is more of what's going to be on the AP test. That's that the Federal Reserve loans money to banks. Banks loan money to you. You spend money. This helps create jobs and the economy grows. And it all starts because the good old Federal Reserve loaning money to banks, blah, blah, blah. Well, during the Great Depression, we've already talked about the causes. the banks go under, businesses go under, that sucks all the money out of the economy. And when the money goes out of the economy, we have deflation, that decreases demand. And if demand goes down, like we said, all of a sudden people are spending less. That means they're buying less cars. That means car dealers have to lower their prices. They lower their prices to a point that they're not making a profit. Eventually the car dealership goes out of business. The car dealership fires all the workers. On top of that, the car dealership can't pay back their loans. So the bank can't get its money, so the bank goes under and it just collapses downwards. This is the other story of the Great Depression, and there's definitely some truth to this. So we need to get the money to the people. How do we get the money to the people in the situation, right? Because deflation's down. We've got to get demand back up, because if demand does not get back up, businesses cannot run. People aren't spending. That's killed the businesses. We have to find a way to increase demand. And the only real way to increase demand is you've got to get money in people's pockets. So enter the plan during the New Deal. And this idea is, all right, well, the government is going to borrow money instead of the banks, because the banks are gone. The banks aren't in a situation to do this. The government will borrow money, and the government will get the money to the people, mainly by creating jobs programs. Now that people have money in their hands, they're going to be able to spend money. Now, where did the government get that money? They borrowed that money on your behalf. It's not like, oh, gee, the government's doing such a great thing. Thank you, government. You're going to go in debt for me. No, the government is going in debt for you because they're borrowing money for you. You are going to be the one that pays this off because it's the government of the people, by the people, for the people. You're the one that's actually borrowing the money. This is called Keynesian economics. The plan here is that the government will stimulate the economy. The government will get money to the people to increase aggregate demand. Once they give you money for doing jobs like building bridges, building roads, building dams, doing whatever, we'll talk more about those New Deal programs soon. You get the money, you spend the money, and if you spend more, demand goes up. They're going to start to make more goods because now people are spending. They're going to have to bring workers back, and the economy will come back together, but actually it doesn't really tend to work out that way. But that is the theory behind Keynesian economics, and we say theory because we know that it didn't work. We can look at the hard data and the unemployment rate throughout the 1930s and see that this philosophy, these programs did not fix the economy. It more than likely made things worse. Now, some people can argue that, oh, it didn't make things worse. It could have been a lot worse if the government didn't get involved. It's not true, but you can listen to that argument from the progressives and from your modern liberals. But what we all will have to say is, look, the Great Depression did happen. It did exist for 10 years, whereas in the past, these cycles usually only lasted a year. So why is that? What changed? If we look at all the different patterns from the past, and we notice that these depressions or panics only lasted about a year, what made this one different? What made it different was for the first time the government got involved. And for the first time, the panic did not end after a year. It lasted 10 years. Classical liberals and modern liberals have to agree on that. So that's Keynesian economics, and that also, we follow that today. It also can cause a lot of inflation because the government's borrowing a lot of money and pumping it into the economy. The Federal Reserve is still pumping a bunch of money into the economy. They're going this way about doing that. And this is not old school. And remember, when we're looking at the past, we're not just studying stuff that happened years and years ago, and it doesn't matter. Here is today, 2009, when our economy crashed from the housing crisis, to 2020, and you're going to see this. Oh, hey, that looks a lot like this one. Wait a second. We've got a general rise in price. Look, scroll it. This is a general rise in prices. Wait a second. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is this general, or is that today, is this general rise in prices because we're producing more goods, that we're innovative, we're coming up with new things, and people are getting more jobs? Or is that the Federal Reserve has low interest rates, which we can tell now. We know what the Federal Reserve interest rates have been for the last 10 years, and they've been rock bottom. And so we can see this general rise in prices because we've increased the supply of money, which has increased demand without a subsequent increase in the supply of goods. And so we're saying, look, these prices might be fake. They might be illusory. It is a bubble. At some point, it has to autocorrect. It has to recalibrate because these prices are just reflecting the inflation that we have created. And that is caused by Keynesian economics of the government pumping more money in the economy, the government going into debt, pumping the money into the economy, trying to stimulate demand. That's great, but you need to increase supply with that demand. Here's the Great Depression again. As I said before, your big culprit is going to be the Federal Reserve, who pumped too much money into the economy. Chicago School agrees. The Austrian economists agree. These are the facts. If you want to believe in the AP's causes for the Great Depression, you should if you want to answer them on a test. This is not going to be on the test, but this is what you should know for your life because we are experiencing it today. Our current boom and bust cycle in the 2008-2009 period, and then in 2020, it's the same thing again. It's the Federal Reserve sending the economy up too high, and then because we are too high, eventually there is a significant crash. Now, during this, there was a deflationary. Now, the Austrians don't agree with this. This is more the Chicago school, but either way, they do agree that inflating the economy was a major problem. And then, obviously, their solution here. What do you think their solution is during the Great Depression? And this is the solution that we use today, unfortunately. It's, hey, we got ourselves into this mess by pumping the economy, by printing a bunch of money, by the government going into debt, by following Keynesian economics. We're just going to get more money out to the people. That'll increase demand. That's what we did that got us into the problem. It crashes. What do you think the answer is? Once it crashes, yeah, you're probably right. It's pump more money into the economy. That's what we did then. It didn't work. That's what we did in 2008. It didn't work. And guess what we're doing now in 2020? The way to fix our crisis at the moment is the government's giving out more free money to increase demand. And it's just going to create another boom-bust cycle. And it doesn't have to be this way. The Austrians will argue like, look, there's going to be ups and downs, but they shouldn't be giant ups and giant downs. There shouldn't be giant booms and giant crashes. It should be slow and steady. And this all should depend on banks and borrowers. It shouldn't be a Federal Reserve. If people are spending too much and not saving enough. So in this situation, if you can see here, let's just look at peak one. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but in peak one here, people are spending a lot and the economy is growing. But if you're spending, you're not saving. And the banks need you to save, because if you are not saving your money, then the banks can't loan money out. So in this situation, you have people and you have banks. The people are spending a lot, but the banks are suffering because you're not saving enough. That means they can't loan. So what the banks will do at this point, the banks will raise interest rates. The banks raise interest rates, and then you realize, oh, that's a great interest rate. I'm going to save my money because I can get a good return. And so you start saving more. They start to get more. They're also not loaning much money because the interest rates are too high. No one wants to borrow. Everybody wants to save. And then all of a sudden, we start to sink down to here. Oh, no, the interest rates are too high. People are saving too much, and they're not spending enough. Well, at this point, the banks realize, well, we need them to spend more, but also we should loan money into the economy because we don't need all this money in our vaults. So they start loaning it out. How do they loan it out? By lowering interest rates. And that convinces people, oh, I can borrow more. I can borrow more. I can borrow more. Also, they realize, I don't want to borrow. I'm not going to make any money. The interest rates are too low. And that's how it evens out in a normal economy. And you know how many booms and busts and booms and busts and booms and busts? That's the way it's supposed to work. But we don't have that. In the Woodrow Wilson, the progressive, decides that, no, what we're going to do is we're going to create a Federal Reserve that manages the money. And ever since this creation, we've had these giant booms and busts. Before the creation of the Federal Reserve, before any of that, the money was, we would have down times, but it would really quickly autocorrect. That's the Austrian side of it. Your modern liberals and progressives have gotten to the modern monetary theory of inflation doesn't even matter. They've gotten to the wacko point, and we're almost all going to join in now. They've gotten to the point where they say, it doesn't matter, just print money, print money, print money, it doesn't matter. But it does matter. And you can say print money, print money, print money as much as you want. But it's got to hit a point where the realization happens where prices are going to fall to their real level. Or maybe not. Maybe the progressives and the modern monetary theorists are correct. I don't know. So probably should get rid of the Fed, but we have not gotten rid of the Fed. Here is your AP causes for the Great Depression: income disparity, overspeculation, overproduction, too many loans. That's great. And those did contribute. But the main reason for this stuff to happen was the Fed was pumping a bunch of money in the economy, which allows income disparity to happen. The Fed is pumping a bunch of money, easy money into the economy, easy to borrow money. So it's easy to speculate and gamble on the stock market. There's easy money, which covers up overproduction. It's easy to borrow the money, and you can make it through. We're seeing the same thing happen today in the natural resources in the oil companies. The oil companies, the fracking companies, have been overproducing for years, and they've been covered up because of the easy money created by the federal government. And then too many loans. How do you get too many loans? You get too many loans because interest rates are too low. It's too easy to borrow the money. So look, if these are the causes, then let's take a step back at what caused these causes. That's the Federal Reserve's monetary policy of low interest rates, which causes inflation and a general rise in prices. Eventually, it's got to come down. So if these are true, then this has to be true. The 3 R's, we talked about these in the last video. I don't have enough time to go into it yet, so we'll pick up here in the next video.